Hey everyone, and welcome to today's quarterly Sectigo Pulse webinar, where we cover the latest in product and compliance news and how these events may impact you. I'm Kristen Santos, Marketing Specialist at Sectigo, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Presenting with us today, we have Nick France, Sectigo's CTO of SSL. Hey Nick.
Hey Kristen, good to be here again. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. And we also have Tim Callan, Senior Fellow at Sectigo. Hey Tim, how's it going?
Hi, Kristen. It's going great.
Awesome. So now before we get started, I'd just like to remind all attendees that you will remain on mute for the duration of today's webinar. And we anticipate that to take around 45 minutes with some time for Q&A at the end. You will be able to submit your questions throughout the webinar using the chat. And again, we'll get to those at the end. Also, we will be recording today's webinar, so be on the lookout for that link to be shared tomorrow. That's it from me. Tim, if you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Kristen. So for those of you who are returning, you probably know this, and for our new listeners, first of all, thank you for joining us. Pulse is our quarterly webinar series where we give you an update on the state of the nation for public certificates and public trust, and in particular, with a strong focus on SSL. We'll talk about what's happened in the last 90 days and important things that are coming up. So on this occasion, we have really three things we want to talk about on today's agenda. And the first one is that the recent changes that have come by that have limited TLS certificates to 1 year, actually 13 months in duration. This is very, very important. Everyone needs to understand it. We will tell you everything you need to know on that. We also have received some interesting research in the last quarter on how the COVID work from home environment has affected enterprise security and access. And we want to share with you some of the highlights, some of the big takeaways from that. And then we want to talk about an important initiative for us, Sectigo Quantum Labs, that has been announced in the last 90 days. So with that, let's take it away. And first of all, the limits of public TLS to 1 year. So Nick, what happened?
Yes. Well, we talked about this last time, I think, but at the end of August, the browsers collectively, although it was primarily or initially driven by Apple, and then Google, Mozilla, and others followed suit. But they basically set to enforce time limits on public TLS server certificates, which had prior to that they'd been at, as it says, 825 days, which is 2 years plus a couple of months for kind of leeway in order to do the validation and to allow people to renew early. But that was brought down to 398 days, so essentially 13 months, as you said. So what?
Right.
1 year
certificates. Do the math on it. If it's a leap year and that month is a 31-month day, then that would be 397 days. So they've given you 13 months over the worst possible circumstances and 1 day grace period. Right?
Exactly.
So it's
exactly.
Obviously
that's
a very carefully calculated number, and to be 13 months, no longer than 13 months under the longest possible definition of 13 months.
Yes, exactly that. So this came in at the end of August. It's impacting just server certificates. So as we've talked about before, things like code signing certificates, things like your email certificates, and things like an enterprise private CA, they were all unaffected. This was purely just the certificates you get for your website. And it's really part of a drive to having the lifetime of these certificates shorter, so that any problems that happen with them can be mitigated in a much shorter time, rather than having 10-year certificates out there that people don't replace, and we have to wait 10 years for a problem to time out effectively.
Yeah, I mean, there's it's a good point, because we get this a lot. You and I each talk to a lot of subscribers, and we get a question, well, why are they doing this? And if I may, I would say somebody from a browser would really point to two main things. And first of all, they would say shorter certificates just generally are more secure just because they're shorter. Like hypothetically, if somebody stole your private key and you didn't know it, then the amount of time they can do bad things with it has gone down, pure and simple. right? So
Yep.
the less time there is, the certificates out there, the less exposure there is. And then the second point is this idea of crypto agility, to say things happen like we decide we have to deprecate SHA-1. And this example gets brought up a lot. They talk about how many years it took to get rid of SHA-1 completely. And I'm not even completely, it's out of the public CA world. It's still floating around the private CA world. But, you know, how many years it took to get there, and that it shouldn't have taken that long. And if you make all these leaf certs shorter, fundamentally you put a limit on those things just because all the certs will expire.
Yep.
So those are the motivators. And I think we agree, you and I would agree, that those are worthy motivators. And even though it means that people have to adapt the way they work, that this is what we need to do to have a healthy online ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, your mention of the agility there, Tim, is exactly right. I mean, we can look to past examples, SHA-1 to SHA-2, or the increase in RSA key sizes. But I think also it's something we might touch on in the latter half of our webinar today in terms of the you know, quantum certificates and quantum computing, because that is an event that could basically mean we have to change certificates very, very rapidly, and this
Yes.
drive to shorter certificates is it's also pushing, you know, our favorite topic, the one that I tend to go off on rants about on these presentations, which is automation.
Yes.
Having this task, having to go through every year now, you know, it used to be a 10-year certificate, then 5, then 3, then 2, now every year. It's kind of an incentive for people to start thinking about automating these certificates and automating their certificate management, which is nothing but a good thing, because it means we can all change a lot quicker, and we can always you know, adapt to these changing circumstances that you've talked about.
Yeah, so let me highlight a couple points on this slide, and then we can get into that topic, because I think it's a good one to talk about, Nick, which is, first of all, your existing 2-year certs that were issued before September 1 are fine, and they will be fine for their full duration. So even if you got a 2-year cert on August 31st, that is going to last the 2 full years, even though that extends beyond the maximum time period of a cert that's issued on September 1 or later. So that's important point number one. Important point number two is what they call quote unquote technical enforcement will come out in browser releases between now and the end of the year. And so what that means is, hypothetically, if you could get a 2-year public SSL cert today, it would actually work in the browser right now. But somewhere along the line, there's going to be a release, and when that release comes, it would stop working. However, that CA would be in violation of the root program requirements, and if that cert were discovered, that CA would need to revoke that cert immediately. So
Exactly, yeah.
I suspect there aren't any of those certs out there, and if they are, then that is a bad mistake, and if they are found, they will be killed. So if you think you're sitting on a 2-year cert that was issued after September 1, then don't count on it to stick around.
Absolutely. I mean, all of this information, because these are public certificates, they can be publicly audited using certificate transparency. So absolutely, people are checking for them. There don't appear to have been any now. I think there were a very small number that were issued the day of September the 1st by a couple of different CAs, which obviously, as you said, it's in violation of the requirements of Apple, Mozilla, and Google and the rest. But you know, these mistakes do happen. You know, time zones is a complicated issue for any development or any team or any programmer, as I'm sure everybody understands. But as you say, getting a 2-year certificate today from a public CA is not something that would happen. Hypothetically, if you could, then yes, that certificate will continue to work until the browsers and the vendors actually enforce this within the software itself.
Right, but they do plan to. They've said they will, and I'm sure they will. They're just, it's on whatever release train it's on, and it's fine. There's no particular reason why it needs to be faster than that. So response. So we have ceased issuing 2-year public certs on all platforms prior to September 1. We believe that all major public CAs have done the same thing, and we have seen no evidence to indicate otherwise. And instead, if you don't like the idea of having to go and subscribe for a new cert or order a new cert every year, there is an option called subscription SSL. And what subscription SSL allows you to do, I actually have an arrow here, a mistake here. It's available at 3 or 5 year increments. And what the subscription SSL allows you to do is you basically, you sign up, you say, I'm going to need an SSL cert for this domain for this time period. You get a price break if you subscribe for a longer time period. And then every year, it's all handled for you automatically, and you just get your new certificate. So that is a great option if you did enjoy the long-lived certs because you had to think about them less. That's a way to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's essentially a form of automation. I will say it in there again, because obviously the more you do automation and the more CAs are kind of promoting, automation has been available for a very long time. This is not something that's necessarily new, but we understand that it takes time for people to adopt it, and hopefully this change down to 398 days is going to drive people to investigate that more. And we're of course happy to discuss that with you, but it means that you can get to a stage where we would like to be with all certificates, which is they're automated, but they're fire and forget. You do the setup, you install things, you get the certificate going, you buy the certificate through subscription SSL, and you don't have to worry about it. It's like your domain names. It just automatically renews every year. The money comes out of your account, you pay for it. And it's not something you have to worry about, because we don't want people to worry about this. We want this to be, it's a technology everyone uses, everyone has to have, and we want it to be as easy as possible for everybody to have it and not have to worry about it.
And that's a really great analogy, Nick. Think about domain names. Like, most people don't even realize that if you go all the way back to ICANN, you can only have a domain name for a year. And what happens is when they go out and they sign up for a multi-year domain name or an auto-renewal domain name, what they're really doing is they're signing up for a service through their domainer. And what their domain name provider is doing is they are auto-renewing your domain name. And they're doing it every year, and they're charging you either upfront or charging your card once a year, or whatever you've worked out with them. That's what's going on there. And this is like that. This is very, very analogous to that. So recommended actions. So if you were using 2-year certificates for a processor system, that's going to be 1-year certificates from now on. It just is. And so one of our recommended actions is just make sure that you are prepared for that. And I'll give you a couple examples. Example number 1 is if you had some kind of script or process that was, had a calendar date and it's going to go in 2 years, that calendar date better be changed, because you don't have 2 years anymore, right? And so that would be a good example of the kind of thing to worry about. And so this is a good time to try to figure out if any of that stuff exists, rather than a year from now when what would have been your 2-year cert expires without being replaced because the calendar date item didn't go, right?
Yeah, and most CAs, and I think because this is 398 days as well, it's important to remember that if you do have this spike in your renewals, so when your previous 2-year certs are expiring, or as you've suggested here, Tim, 1 year from September the 1st, because the maximum duration is 398 days, most certificates are bought for 1 year, which is 365 or 366 days. So the extra 30 some days is really to give you this flexibility here, and most CAs will help you and cooperate with you to ensure that you don't have this spike in renewals all on the same day. Now, some customers I know I've spoken to actually quite like that. They want to have them all renew at the same time because they have processes in place to handle that. But equally, a lot of people don't. And this flexibility of these extra 30 something days is a great tool to allow them to kind of spread that out a little bit. You can make sure that your renewals don't all spike on September the 1st, 2021, and you can spread them out through the month of August or September as well. So it is an important thing to look to make sure that you don't have everything expiring on the same day and cause a panic.
Yep, and early renewal, of course, is always a good idea. Don't order your new cert on the day your old cert dies, right? Order it a little early, and that helps us with that too. And then connected to that is look for a spike. Maybe isn't the right word, but a sudden move to a new plateau in terms of the number of certificate events that you'll have as your 2-year certs age out and get replaced with 1-year certs, right? So over the next 365 days, you should, if you've been depending on 2-year certs, you should expect the number of renewal events to double.
Mhm.
and just be prepared for that. Now, again, automation, if you're automated, you probably don't care, you may not notice. If you're doing non-automated manual events, or if part of this process is non-automated and manual, then you need to plan for this. You need to have the capacity planning, and you need to make sure that you can handle that from a resourcing perspective and from an error perspective and all the rest. I've already said it, but I'll say again, your 2-year certs that you have right now are fine. Don't worry about them, they're fine. Don't need to change them, they're fine. Your private root TLS certs are whatever they were. They're fine, they're unaffected. And other certificate types, SMIME, code signing, document signing, all those are fine, those are unaffected.
Yep.
And then to come back to what you said, automation, right? Like if you're not automating, you really got to be looking into it, because it'll reduce errors, it'll reduce outage and downtime, it'll reduce the human capital you have to invest in this. You can use your precious skills, internal skills that are always, you know, you need more of than you have on other things. Let the automation do the certificates for you. And if you weren't motivated to do it, maybe the idea that over the next year the number of certificate renewal events you have is going to double, maybe that will be motivational enough to take on the automation project.
I would hope so. And I think there's two sort of additional points that I've certainly been making to anybody I've spoken to about this as well, is to say, automation is key, but there's a couple of other reasons. Obviously, we're down to 1 year. We're down to, as you say, twice the number of potentially manual actions that you have to take. I think it's important to say that while there's nothing concrete in place yet, I think we'd be remiss to suggest that 398 days is going to be the limit forever.
Yes.
I mean, we certainly believe that making certificate lifetime shorter, as we've said, is a beneficial thing for everybody. I'm certain the powers that be at Google and Microsoft and Mozilla and everywhere else are considering shorter terms as well. We certainly issue them as part of our business, so we already facilitate that. But I think it's not a good idea to sit there and think, well, I don't mind doing it once a year. As we say, it lines up with domain names. I'll just carry on as I am. That term is going to potentially get lower. It might not be for a couple of years, but I think it is going to come down. And of course, the other problem, as we briefly mentioned, and we'll probably talk about more in a few minutes, is it's the unknown events. It's this quantum apocalypse. It's another vulnerability like Heartbleed that we saw a few years ago. It's another cryptographic vulnerability. It's these kind of things that we can't control and can't predict that can force mass revocation and mass reissue events. And unfortunately, a lot of those are beyond our control. All right. I mean, we don't get 6 months notice for when somebody discovers a new flaw in OpenSSL. We have days notice at best, maybe even less. And to protect everybody, our own customers included, we may need to make changes very quickly. So it's definitely important to look at that automation, because it isn't just this one year change that's going to impact you. It's the potential unknowns and potential shorter lifetimes.
Right. And if you're an SMB and you say, gee, I don't have the resources or the money or the internal skills to do this automation myself, that's where you should look at subscription SSL. Subscription SSL is basically doing that for you.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. So let's talk from work from home and security. So we all know, let's start with the things we know. COVID-19 threw a curveball at IT teams everywhere, and all of a sudden what happened in March was we all had to go work from home right now. But we still needed to maintain productivity and security, and this reflected certainly at a lot of organizations in what went on with their IT initiatives. If I had a situation where 95% of my employees were sitting in an office that I owned, connecting through gateways that I owned that were physically inside my buildings, and all of a sudden 99% of my employees were not, what does that mean in terms of help desk tickets, IT initiatives, etc.? And we wanted to know that. So we commissioned a study to impact the sudden work, to study to understand the sudden work from home requirements on IT teams and enterprise. And our survey set was 500 IT professionals in organizations of 1,000 or more employees in the countries you see listed there. And we commissioned a venerable research firm, Wakefield Research, to field and conduct a study on our behalf. And so Wakefield, that's their domain, their website down there, wakefieldresearch.com. Wakefield did this study, and the results we see here, the results that Wakefield discovered and reported back. And this isn't all the results, by the way. We have a big white paper available. You can go get it on our website, but these are a few of the highlights that I thought were most interesting. So first of all, now remember the dates on this. This is May 15 to 26 is when this was in the field. So, excuse me. First of all, as of May 15 to 26, 94% of companies were set up for working from home. So there's that little 6% haven't made changes yet, but everybody else is set up. 36% were all ready to go. 33% did a quick investment in systems, and 25% could reuse what they already had. So, you know, that's an important takeaway. We think was a pretty high compliance rate with people getting ready for work from home. And of course they had to be. Now, how did that happen? So this is interesting. 1/5 of them took more than 2 weeks to set up. So here's the question. From the day your company decided to have employees work from home, how many days did it take IT to completely set up your remote work systems? So on the what do I want to say? Starting at noon on the early hours of the pie chart there, we have really good performance, 29% less than a day. By the way, that looks an awful lot like that group that was already set up, right? 36%, 29% less than a day, 29% 1 to 7 days. Good job, guys. That's more than half. Then you get these laggards, right? And it's a non-trivial amount, right? 20% of them, and 10% of them more than 60 days. So think about if you were working in that environment and the pandemic was breaking and people were trying to get out of there, and it took more than 60 days to get you set up to work from home. What happened? Did these people just lose their productivity? Were they insecure? So that's kind of a big, I'd say a big minus. Thoughts on any of this so far, Nick?
No, I think it's definitely very interesting what we've come up with, and to see how to see how the research has shown that a good percentage. I mean, a good third that seem to be fairly well prepared for something like this. It's not fantastic, but I still think it's pretty impressive that there is a significant percentage that were just ready to go. But obviously, we understand it's not always a straightforward challenge to be able to migrate to this. I mean, certainly we at Sectigo managed to do it fairly well. We're a reasonably spread out team anyway. I mean, you and I are several thousand miles apart anyway.
Right.
But obviously, not everybody is geared up to be able to do that off the bat.
Yeah. So you say, well, what is the consequence about this, right? Was your data security weakened? You take all of these people and you spread them out. They used to all be in one building, and now they're who knows where, right? Does this give you a weaker profile? Most people say no, right? There is a 3% of IT professionals say that they're weakened, that it was weakened. And look at the other side of the pie chart here. Increased significantly, 27%. Increased somewhat, 43%. So that's a huge amount of people who say that as a consequence of moving their workforces to work from home, their data security actually got stronger, right? They put in processes or systems, and at the end of the day, these processes and systems make them better than they were before. So
yeah, it's sad, really, but I guess something that a crisis is what seems to force people to make these changes. I mean, even just as we talked about with the 1 year thing, something like a heartbleed, something like an event that was unpredictable and negative, still causes some positive effects in terms of people adapting to this change very quickly. And if it's such a significant figure that report that security is overall strengthened, then obviously that benefit's going to carry through to the other side effectively.
And that's one of the themes that we see as we go through this research, is that the forcing function of the work from home, of the lockdowns, sent people through initiatives that they probably should have done anyway. And one of the opportunities we have in this, terrible set of events that we're all going through is that we can use it as an opportunity to make our organizations better and stronger than they were before. And we should try to do that to avail something out of it. So how are people authenticating? So this is a little upsetting. Traditional username and passwords is still the most popular by a good bit. And of course, traditional username and passwords is so problematic. It's weak. It's a terrible user experience. There are many well-defined attacks. It generates lots of help desk tickets. It is a productivity drain. There are a lot of problems with traditional username and password, and yet most common authentication method still.
It is. It's what everybody's used to, isn't it? Though I mean, this is the problem here. As much as we as IT professionals, IT security professionals, understand the problems with it, and there are even some potential mitigations and helpful tools with usernames and passwords. I mean, usernames and passwords we know are very very bad, very weak. All the things you said, but there are things that can help make it a little better whilst still using the same systems, password managers and password complexity and such. But it's something we're all used to because, you know, my family and my friends who are not involved in the industry, they use usernames and passwords to log onto Facebook or Gmail or their Amazon account. So it's primarily what people are used to, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a lot of it. I think you got your installed base. It also might be legacy systems, right? We've got the following system that's been around forever and someone coded it 20 years ago and we don't think we have the environment anymore and we don't think we can do a build. And so that's got a username password and that's how it is, right? And
Yep.
and these are real things that happen. Remember, these are enterprises of 1,000 people or more. So these are things that really happen when you get into sizable enterprises.
Absolutely.
So most common connection, company-owned laptops, you know, as opposed to personal laptops or company-owned smart devices. And that's what people, you know, that's mostly what people are using. Not really a surprise there, I would say.
No, but I think
Yeah,
that also extends from the authentication that we've just talked about, because you know, as much as people, or I guess enterprises haven't adopted other authentication mechanisms as we talked about, it still seems to have been a consideration that regardless of the authentication mechanism, we want our employees to use machines that we control. And you know, hopefully when it says a company-owned laptop, that also means it's managed to an extent. So you have some kind of device management on there, you have endpoint security, you have additional security measures that are built into the hardware and the software, which is, you know, beneficial obviously in the long run.
Right. And you know, certainly it could be that, you know, or you know, these employees were being provisioned with these laptops anyway, right? Because, you know, a lot of times you want that flexibility, you want somebody to be able to travel, or you want somebody to be able to, you know, have a day where they have to work from home for whatever reason. And under those circumstances, you know, you want the productivity to work. So they have the laptops anyway, and they just all take them home, right? And use them there.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
the next two slides are interesting. So 30%. So in order to get this done, what was the consequence? Okay, so we geared up, we got everybody running, we got them working from home and they were productive and we feel that it was secure. Excellent. What was the consequence? So 30% of enterprises had to postpone revenue more than a month. So they had revenue generating, I'll read the question. For how long, if at all, has your company been postponing revenue generating initiatives in order to prioritize the setup and success of remote work? So 30% of companies took revenue and had to push it off more than a month in order to deal with the sudden work from home requirements of COVID-19. And that's where we see the cost, the price tag of this sudden change that everybody had to go through.
Yeah, it's not an immediate cost. It's that postponing other tasks in order to adapt to doing this, which again is somewhat understandable, but it's still it doesn't paint a great picture.
Right, and then the other one, and these two kind of fly together. So 1/3, slightly more, had to postpone security initiatives for more than a month. So again, how long, if at all, has your company been postponing cybersecurity initiatives in order to prioritize the success of remote work? So there's both of these things, right? You had an IT team, you had a security team. and they had things they were going to do. And they were going to do these things for a reason, because they felt that there were security holes or potential flaws or things that needed to be addressed, and they had to push that off. And instead of doing that work, they suddenly had to figure out how to get everybody securely working from home. And so postponing that security initiative, that might be the difference between breach and no breach, right? That might be what causes you the data loss, right?
Yep.
That might be the month that someone came and got you.
Yep. And I've
So,
no doubt that there are going to be, the malicious actors out there that are going to be, and have certainly taken advantage of this
right,
distraction, as it were. I mean, that's,
yeah,
I'm sure we've all seen the reports of various, various breaches and things that have happened and continue to happen even during COVID as they did before. But it's, it's likely that there is going to be a marked increase due to exactly what this graph represents.
yeah. So those were, I mean, that's kind of in the cost. That's the downside. Now, but what was the upside? So 50%, not quite. I think it's 49%. Report that employer productivity actually went up. So, in your opinion, how has employee productivity or company changed as a result of widespread remote work during recent months? Look at this. So, 49% say it increased, as opposed to a mere 17% who say it decreased. So, these professionals feel that one of the consequences at the end of all of this was that their employee productivity has gotten higher. And then connected to that, you say, well, what's going to happen with remote work after it's all over? Once it's all done and there's no pandemic, what's going to happen? And again, 59% of them say, I believe that remote working at my company is going to increase as a direct result of this. So this is where we're looking at the positives. Productivity's gone up, and companies are going to be more equipped to allow that to continue to happen even after mandatory work from home is fully lifted.
It's going to be a fundamental shift in the way we work going forward. I think there's been many people smarter than I that have said that and done this analysis. But from personal experience, myself and obviously friends and family, it's just a difference in the way that people are going to work from now on. And as you say, even after the pandemic is over, and as far as we can say it's over, it is definitely going to change the way people work. I mean, these investments that have been made in order to facilitate these people working from, they're not things you necessarily can undo or even want to undo. These are, in many cases, beneficial changes which will help everybody going forward.
Right, exactly. And now the last one that flies in this constellation of results that's very interesting is security. So they've had to invest in the systems they needed to be confident that their employees could be sitting at an unknown device anywhere in the world and still be accessing the data and the systems they needed in a secure way that was not going to leave the company vulnerable. And so therefore, after your offices are reopened, do you think that security for data and applications will increase, say the same or decrease? Once again, huge. 58% see that security will increase, has increased as a consequence. And look at that, stayed the same as 39%, decreased somewhat is 3%, and what you don't see is decreased significantly because it's not on here because it was 0%. So this is a strong endorsement that security also. So employee productivity, the ability to have work from home or remote workforces, and security are all seen as big winners coming out of the work that everybody had to do to be able to send their workforces home.
Which isn't surprising. They say we have to look at the upsides to what is going on, and it definitely is a benefit that we're going to see this increase in security, and it's going to be maintained after we return back to some semblance of normality.
And certainly nobody wanted it to happen this way, but at least let's use that, right? Let's use those benefits and make sure that we can benefit from them moving forward. So again, those are some highlights. There's more than that. We just didn't have time to go in the whole thing. If you want to know more, Nick's and my coworker Jason Sirocco and I did a webinar on this a few months ago. You could go look that up and you could see all the results. We also have a white paper on these, which you can go get from us and download. You can see all the results on that. So lastly, introducing Sectigo Quantum Labs. So Nick, quantum computing, it's a thing.
It is. It is indeed. It's one of these. It's one of these events that we mentioned briefly before. But it's It's also one of these things that the word quantum gets thrown around, and people talk about quantum physics and stuff as if it is an incredibly complicated topic. But I think as we're going to talk about, it's an incredibly complicated topic that most of us know very little about, but as we'll explain, could have the potential to have a significant impact in our industry, which we know does have an impact way beyond that, just to average website users and as I say, Facebook and Gmail and things that you might log into every day.
Yeah, so quantum computers are being developed. They look like that thing on the right, and quantum computers use the facts of quantum physics to allow a bit to have more than one state at the same time, unlike a traditional 1-0 gated computer. And so in general, that can lead to more efficiency in how your computer operates. But those efficiency gains come at a different rate for different kinds of tasks. And there are certain tasks that can be hugely faster, 10, 12 orders of magnitude faster with a quantum computer.
I think it's pretty good here to mention why we're interested in this, really, and that's right. for PKI, for SSL, for TLS and certificates. Everything we have here is about encryption. Encryption is taking plain information, running it through an algorithm, and encoding it to something at the other end that can only be read by someone with the key, by the intended recipient, right, let's say. And fundamentally, these processes, these algorithms, are based on mathematical problems which are hard for computers to do. Okay, so yes, if you were to just take the kind of encryption algorithm that, and I may have had a strange childhood, but the kind of thing I was doing at school when I wanted to write a note to my friend, and you'd write the alphabet out and you'd pick a password, and you'd then something called a substitution cipher. You change one letter for the other. Fantastic for fooling the teacher and anybody else that paid attention, but for a computer to try every single permutation of the alphabet, there's probably enough power in our wristwatches to do it in no time at all. So a lot of the encryption we use today, things like RSA and ECC, they are algorithms based on complicated mathematical problems that modern current computers, non-quantum computers, cannot do very quickly. So it's things like taking a big prime number and dividing it into the two prime numbers that make it up. There is no shortcut.
A big non-prime number and factoring it down to the prime numbers, exactly.
And the quantum computers are the ones that can potentially come along and solve these problems, as you say, orders of magnitude faster, which means that a lot of the things we have and a lot of the technologies we're based upon can be, potentially bypassed, decrypted, whatever you want to call it, in practical time, not waiting until the universe ends, but in real time with an awful lot of money and computing power thrown at it.
And so I cribbed this from an NIST, National Institutes of Standards and Technologies, white paper that came out in 2019 on this topic. And you see here they show some of the numbers, and look in particular in the middle, RSA and ECC, which of course are the cryptography that sits behind, I don't know how many nines, 99.9999% of what we do in the real computing world. And look at these numbers, right? RSA 2048 can be cracked in little over a day.
Yep, and RSA 2048 is, as you say, it's thankfully getting slightly less popular as time goes on. ECC is improving, but you see the numbers there are not much better. I mean,
ECC is not doing a lot better.
20 hours.
Yeah, so this isn't a real-time spoof man in the middle attack where I pretend to be you and screen scrape. It's not that, but it certainly is somebody captures your session and throws it into a computer, and 2 days later they have your data unencrypted. And so there's all kinds of secrets that are that still need to be secret in a week or a month, let
Yep.
alone a day and a half. And so,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Uh,
Mm, so
Sorry, go ahead, Tim.
RSA and ECC really are the problems here, and RSA and ECC really are the things that need to be dealt with. And so there is an effort being led by NIST to come up with new algorithms that will not suffer from this problem. And they're at 15 candidate algorithms right now. And we expect the final number to get down lower than that, probably not down to one. There will probably be multiple choices available. First of all, because they might be good for different use cases. And second of all, because for something like this, a little redundancy is nice. But as those algorithms come along, the consequence of that is going to be that all of our certificates that are sitting on RSA and ECC are going to have to get swapped over to these new algorithms. That's public and private.
Yep.
And
It,
so, well, so first of all, that talks to the crypto agility thing you were mentioning earlier, Nick, right? If your public certs are all going away in a year, that helps.
Exactly. This is one of
Yeah.
these events that we, I've been telling people to be prepared for. I mean, it's not something we can predict. We know what we know. We know that it's coming soon. In quotes, that could be the breakthrough. Could be months from now. It could be years from now. But it is one of these events that would facilitate or would require all these certificates, public, private, code signing, SMI, everything to potentially be changed over, because as we've said, the fundamental algorithms they're based upon would be weakened to the point of almost uselessness.
But it's not just the certs, right? It's also the systems. So if I stood up
Yes.
if I stood up a server today and I threw a TLS cert on it that used one of these candidate algorithms, and random people came and tried to access me with their browsers, their computer can't handle that algorithm. So a bunch of other stuff needs to be swapped out. All of our software, our operating systems, our firmware, all of that has to be swapped out in all of the many places and ways that it functions. And this is a huge Herculean mammoth task. And there's going to be laggards. And there's things that are going to be forgotten. And there's going to be problems that come from that. And so one of the consequences of that is something called a hybrid certificate. And so I guess I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but what is Sectigo Quantum Labs? So we announced Sectigo Quantum Labs, and as you've probably all read this by now while I was prattling on, it is our focused effort to educate and enable our customers and the larger market to be ready for this changeover. So we have a lot of educational assets, more than 25 and more on the way. And we have created this quantum safe certificate test kit, which is kind of what I was talking about. And we worked with a company called Isara to do that. And what the quantum safe kit allows you to do is you can actually, well, I'll get to that because I have a slide on that. So here's the Quantum Labs site, sectigo.com, like always, /quantum-labs. Or you can navigate there from our homepage, or you can search for Sectigo Quantum. Any of those things will get you there. But when you land on this is the top level page of the microsite. This is where you can access those resources, and this is where you can download the Quantum Safe Kit. You see a button there at the top, or you can speak to our experts if you want to do that. So what is a hybrid cert? A hybrid cert is a certificate that enables more than one encryption algorithm. So for example, you could have a hybrid cert that has RSA or ECC on it and also has one of the quantum safe algorithms on it. Now I stick that cert on my server and I can service new machines that are able to have quantum safe connections. And I can also service old machines that are not able to. And so hybrid certs are an incredibly important part of switching all of our infrastructure over from the old to the new without having this time period where I have to choose, where I have a machine that can only connect to one or the other. Instead, what I can use a hybrid cert, and I can swap them out. I can remove some of the old and put some of the new in its place. And so that is available. Well, go ahead, Nick. You were going to say something.
No, I was going to say it's you know, these hybrid certificates are obviously critical, but the kit as a whole is very important, especially the education piece that you mentioned, Tim, because you know, as you talked about earlier, this is still an evolving standard, if you like. We in this industry, we work on standards. You know, the reason ECC and RSA are so widely popular is because they're well-defined standards. They're things that have been deployed and known for many years. They've been battle tested. They've been proven, and that's great. And with quantum safe algorithms and quantum safe systems, they're still evolving. But because of everything we do know about this, kits like this are important, not just for testing, but for education, because people need to prepare, people need to understand this is a change that may happen. But I think it is important to know that, as you've said, you know, because standards aren't defined yet, this isn't going to work 100%. And this, you know, we're not selling quantum safe certificates today. You can't go and buy one that'll just work because the standard isn't defined. And we're part of an ecosystem. That's the other thing to bear in mind. So we as a CA, we do issue certificates, but we issue certificates to guidelines and requirements which have definitions as to what algorithms and things we can use. We have partnerships with Microsoft, Apple, Mozilla, Google, who build the software which our certificates are consumed by, and obviously they need to be updated. And there's things that people don't see. There's not just the software, there's things like the hardware that we use, the hardware we store keys in to keep them securely, called HSMs. They need to be updated as well. So there's this whole ecosystem of things that need to take advantage of this. And because we don't know when it's going to happen, and because it's ever evolving, the idea of education around this is really critical, so people know and people know to prepare for something.
Absolutely, 100% agreed. And part of the way you prepare for it, I think, is you have to understand what's going on with your own systems. So if you do get the Quantum Safe Kit, what you can do is you can create your own private root hybrid TLS certs. It has all the tools you need in there to do that, which you can then put in your own sandbox and you can use. So you can start to do things like see how they work, satisfy yourself that they're working correctly, play around with hybrid scenarios where you've got some ECC and some new lattice-based algorithm going on at the same time. You can start to actually, you know, you could replicate existing systems that you have and stuff the quantum certs in there and see what breaks and start to figure out what things are not able to adapt and get current with that. You know, identify areas that need upgrades. All of these things are perfect. So it's a great testing and development tool. It's free for download. Anybody can come get one. You don't have to be a Sectigo customer. So we strongly recommend you come there. And while you're there, avail yourselves of the other resources as well. So I'm going to take a second to pitch, as I always do. If you did like this conversation, we talked about earlier, my associate Jason Sirocco and I are running a podcast called Root Causes, PKI on Security Podcast. We have more than 120 episodes. We're publishing most weeks. We publish 2 episodes, some weeks only 1, but we're pretty busy. And we cover all topics, all matters of digital certificates, PKI encryption, and things like that. So we'd love to have you come join us. Go to the place you listen to podcasts and type in Root Causes PKI. You'll definitely find us as the first result if you do that. And we often have Nick on. So you know, you get to hear Nick's voice as well. And with that, I think we're ready for questions.
Awesome. We got quite a few questions, Tim. So I'm gonna start with the ones that we received at the beginning of the webinar and then move throughout, just so you know the kind of topics that we'll be going over. So first up, so can we order certs for the full period instead of the 1-year time limit imposed by Sectigo?
I'll take that one, Tim. Yeah, if that's, yeah. So I think the first thing is to just be clear about the definition. We have this subscription SSL, and you are buying a product for up to 5 years. I think, Tim, as you said, it's 1, 3, and 5 years we currently offer. The certificate itself cannot be more than 398 days. That's the regulation. But you've purchased the products, if you like, the subscription, as the name suggests, for a longer term, and during that, it's a case of renewing or reissuing the certificate. And we will handle the validation side for EV and OV and the documentation. And you will just need to, essentially click a link or prove domain control or domain ownership again, or you may be hosted with a partner who's already got that automated completely. But it's just important to note that, yes, we do have the subscription SSL product for up to 5 years, but the underlying certificate itself can never be more than 398 days in order to comply with these regulations.
And that is a hard limit. That is not something that any CA can go beyond.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, and piggyback off of that, a few questions coming in wanting to know how validation works for subscription SSL.
Yep, that's obviously a good question. So we can do the validation behind the scenes, essentially. So there's two components to the validation. The component that's common throughout all the certificate types is the domain verification, or as we call it, DCV, domain control validation. Now that has to be repeated because we are physically issuing a new certificate, and we're required, whenever we issue a certificate, even if it's technically classed as a reissue or a renewal, we're still physically creating a certificate, and so have to do that verification. So you will have to perform that domain validation again. Now that can be as simple as clicking a link in an email, and we can automatically send those out in advance, or it can use one of the other methods that we have available that use DNS or that use HTTP, and in many cases they can be automated. We have a large partner network out there comprised of web hosts and service providers that provide CDN and other kind of hosted solutions, and they can automate a good deal of that for you as well. For OV and EV certificates, there is obviously an additional validation component of the business information, and we will essentially revalidate that for you. So again, we are required to recheck and re-verify that information with industry guidelines, but of course we can start doing that in advance of the expiry of the underlying certificate and do that for you. In the vast majority of cases, it will remain the same. Businesses tend not to change their addresses or their business names often, especially if you intend to be in business for a good amount of time. So we will recheck those documents for you. We will reprocess that for you. We will automate any of the telephone callbacks we need to do as part of that, and then we will issue you a new certificate. But again, we have this grace period to work within that to make sure that you don't have any time where you don't have a valid certificate.
Great, thanks, Nick. And what if you reuse the key and get a new certificate with that same key?
Yes, well, we do allow that, as other CAs do. The same key can be used to get a new certificate. However, we would always recommend that people generate new keys. I mean, it's a best practice, a best security practice, really, to generate that in case the key has potentially been, copied or stolen, or has been moved around, and more people have had access to it than otherwise should. But of course, there is also the issue of key compromise. If that key has been compromised, and that unfortunately happens more and more nowadays, where these keys get leaked or stolen, then obviously we won't accept reissues of that key because we'll have previously revoked the certificate most likely. So while you can use the same private key, absolutely, we would generally recommend that you generate a new key. And I think it also talks a little bit to the points we've discussed today, things like attacks that are coming out, things like crypto agility, and things like the quantum cryptography that's coming out. It's always good to maintain that key hygiene and those best practices and generate a new key every time if you can.
Great, thank you. And in that ballot, they mentioned future ballots may shorten the life cycle even further. Do you have any ideas on when those additional changes are coming?
I would say, now this is us speculating, right? But
yeah,
the cadence so far has been, they give it a couple years and then they shorten it again. So I think, think about, nothing probably happens in the next 365 days. but starting this time in 2021, we get into the danger zone. And in terms of how long it gets shortened, I would think 6 months would be the next target. I don't think they would go straight to 90 days. I do think that the browsers would like to, in the long run, would like to settle on 90 days.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Tim, and that's absolutely right that it is speculation at this point. I mean, there aren't any firm dates yet. There's been no ballots proposed. There's not even been any kind of let's say discussion. You know, the CAB forum has meetings, and we obviously all mingle there. There hasn't been anybody saying, "Oh, we intend to do this and we intend to change it down at this day." It's just our feeling. We also do believe that it is better. And the other point to note is we can and do offer shorter lifetime certificates today. So if people are able to adopt shorter lifetimes, if people are able to,
if you're automated,
if you're automated and you're able to move to 6 months, or you're able to move to 90 days, then we can absolutely help there. You know, please go speak to your account manager or come and speak to us, and we can absolutely help that for you. But I think really saying that it's going to change is just an effort to try and get people to prepare for it, because sometimes these changes are made effectively beyond our control. The browsers, and it can be one browser, as we spoke about, I think last time, Apple made this decision first, and no other browsers followed, but they set the bar. So it's not like we can only listen, you know, we can ignore Apple and listen to other people. So it could come with very little notice. I agree with Tim, it's not likely to anytime soon, but it's just something that we should all bear in mind and prepare for.
Absolutely. Okay, and last question for you guys. When do we anticipate the need to change quantum safe certificates?
So NIST is driving this effort. They originally were supposed to have 3 phases, and phase 3 was supposed to be finishing up next year in 2021. There's now some discussion potentially of a phase 4 to really get it done. As I said, so we started out with 89 candidate algorithms. We're down to 15, and nobody knows for sure, but the general idea is that at the end of the day, maybe it's got to get down to 3 to 5. And those will be the ones that we can put in widespread use. And, it's a small enough number that you can expect somebody to support all of them. It's a big enough number that you've got some sort of failover capability, and maybe some of them are better ones are better for better use cases, or different ones are better for better use cases, right? So that process, what's happening now is these candidate algorithms are getting pounded on by the academic community. So you've got, career cryptographers, people with PhDs in cryptography, that are looking at these things and trying to satisfy themselves that they are truly secure. Because what we don't want is we don't want to roll something out in broad production across the entire globe, and then some smarty stands up at a conference and says, guess what, I figured out an easy way to break this, right? And so we want to be highly confident that that isn't going to happen. And the ultimate ideal is actual mathematical proofs that it can't happen. And that's part of what people are going for. But in the absence of that, very, very, very thorough vetting may have to do. And so exactly how long will that take? It's hard to know that. And it's important because we really want these algorithms ASAP, because, quantum computers aren't going to slow down in terms of how fast they're getting ready. But, and we're still encrypting secrets all the time. So think about this scenario. Let's say you have your your important secrets who are really, really secret, and they're encrypted. And let's say your worst enemy in the world steals them, and they have this encrypted file. Well, hard disks are cheap, right? So they can just put that on the hard disk, and they can wait. And they can wait until they can crack it. And if that's going to take 10 years, in 10 years, they're getting really important secrets that you don't want them to have in 10 years. And so when you start thinking of the scenario in those terms, we really need this ASAP. So there are these two competing forces, which is, on the one hand, we really need these now. On the other hand, we can't use them until they're truly done, or it's just going to be worse. And that's the tension, right? It looks like probably those algorithms will be settled on in 2021 at the earliest, maybe 2022. And then at that point, there will be some kind of effort to push them into the public certificate standards so they're actually usable. Like we couldn't even issue a public cert with one of these algorithms today because it would be against the rules. And so how long does that whole process take? Think at least a year from now, maybe 2 years from now.
Yeah, it's definitely not going to be that quick. We don't think, Tim. I agree with you, and everything you said is absolutely right. But I think the best thing to do really is to educate and prepare. I mean, I'm going to say the word one last time for this this webinar and say automation, because if you know, and I will completely admit there though. I mean, obviously my focus is very much on certificates and PKI, and we know that this quantum computing definitely has a wider impact than that. But in terms of what we do, the more you are automated, the more you're prepared, and the more you're educated, the easier it is to make this change should it happen quickly. You know, it isn't likely to be for a couple of years, but that doesn't mean there's harm in investing, you know, some time to look at your system and look at your infrastructure and say, okay, well, I do need automation. I do need to be able to change quickly. And I do have systems that we simply couldn't move off the algorithms and the certificates and the infrastructure they're using. And it's helpful to know that, because even in a worst case scenario, knowing what isn't going to work and knowing where your problems are going to be is more beneficial than just thinking anything's going to break.
And figuring that stuff out can take time. So this is a good time to get started figuring that stuff out.
None of this is particularly quick, easy, and a lot of it is as I fully admit right at the start, this you know, complicated topic is very heavily on the maths, at least when you get into the fundamentals of it, and it's often something that people might not want to consider because we can't give hard timelines as to when it might be a problem. But I would definitely encourage people to look into it as part of projects for automation and discovery and understanding your estate and your portfolio, and just bear it in mind really, and that's why we provided the toolkit and the educational materials to help.
Great, thanks so much, Nick. Thanks, Tim. That's it for our questions today. I know there was a few that we didn't get to, and we'll reach out to you guys directly to get you an answer. And again, be on the lookout for the recording to be sent out tomorrow. Thank you all for attending.
Thanks, Kristen.
Thanks, Kristen. Thanks, Tim.